Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast.
Right.
Today, we're diving into a company that's a gaming giant, Electronic Arts, or EA for short.
Yeah.
You know, the folks behind The Sims, Madden NFL, and Star Wars Jedi. Fallen Order. Big names, right?
Huge.
But their stock performance, well, that's been a bit of a different story lately.
It hasn't been a superstar, has it?
Not exactly. It's been lagging behind the S&P 500, and that's got investors scratching their heads. So is EA stock a hidden gem or a potential trap? To help us figure that out, we've got our market expert here. Always great to have you on.
Always a pleasure. Love talking stocks, especially when there's a bit of a mystery to unravel.
Right, and this one definitely has some twists and turns. So let's jump right in. Should investors be looking to buy, sell, or hold EA?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, it's not a simple answer, but let's start with some good news. EA's financials, they aren't as bad as their stock performance might suggest. Their gross profit margin, it's sitting at a pretty impressive 74.4%, and they've got a solid debt-to-equity ratio of base 0.5.
Those are some healthy numbers, especially in the gaming world where things can be pretty unpredictable.
Exactly. And here's another thing to consider. EA just announced they're buying back a ton of their own stock, like $1 billion worth.
Wow. That's a pretty big move.
It is. And companies usually only do that when they're pretty confident about their future, you know?
That makes sense. It's like they're saying, hey, we believe in ourselves.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic here. They also missed their earnings target for Q3, and they even lowered their outlook for the whole year. And then there's the Dragon Age, the Veilguard situation. That didn't exactly go as planned. It only attracted about half the players they were hoping for.
You're right to bring those points up. The Dragon Age thing, yeah, that was a bit of a stumble. EA was really counting on that game to be a major hit. And when it underperformed, well, it raised some eyebrows.
It definitely makes you wonder, right? Like, can they still consistently deliver those blockbuster hits?
Exactly. Because the gaming world, it's super competitive. Players have really high expectations these days.
No kidding. So how do we weigh all of this? The strong fundamentals on one hand and these recent setbacks on the other.
Yeah, that's what makes the buy, sell, hold question so tricky. It's a real balancing act.
Totally. So let's break it down for our listeners, especially those thinking about investing in EA. What are the key things they should keep in mind for each option?
All right, well, let's start with hold. If you already own some EA stock, holding onto it might be the smartest move right now. The stock is trading way lower than its highest point over the past year, so there's a chance it could rebound.
Okay, so you're basically playing it safe and waiting to see what happens.
Exactly. Especially since EA's got a whole bunch of new games coming out in 2025.
Right, those could be a big factor.
Mm-hmm.
What about buy then? When would that make sense?
Well, buying EA stock now, that's more of a bet, a gamble that they'll bounce back. You'd be counting on those 2025 releases to be smash hits and really turn things around.
So higher risk, but potentially higher reward too.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. And then there's sell. That
Yeah.
seems like a pretty drastic move. When would that be the right call?
Honestly, selling might be the way to go if you've just lost faith in EA. Maybe you see that Dragon Age thing as a sign of bigger problems, or you're just not comfortable with all the uncertainty surrounding their future.
That makes sense. So basically, it depends on your own risk tolerance and how you see EA's future playing out.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the future, those 2025 releases seem like they're going to be make or break for EA. What can our listeners expect from them?
Well, they've got a mix of old and new. They're bringing back My Sims with a new cozy bundle release, so they're definitely trying to tap into that nostalgia factor.
That's smart. Everyone loves a good dose of nostalgia.
Right? But then they're also taking a risk with Split Fiction, which is a totally new IP. Those are always a wild card, could be a huge hit, could totally flop.
You never know with those. It's like rolling the dice.
Exactly. And to add to the mystery, they've also got 2 unannounced titles in the works for 2025. Nobody knows what those are yet.
Oh, that's intriguing. Love a good mystery. But we do have some concrete details about other releases, right?
Yeah, for sure. Marathon, for example, is creating a lot of buzz. It's a new sci-fi shooter from Respawn Entertainment, the same studio that made Apex Legends, so people are excited about that one.
Apex Legends is huge.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign. And of course, there are the new Star Wars games. EA has a pretty solid track record with those.
Yeah, they've had some major successes with the Star Wars franchise, so it'll be interesting to see what they come up with next.
So it sounds like EA is trying to cover all their bases, huh? Established franchises, new IPs, a few surprises thrown in.
Definitely. But it's not all sunshine and roses. They're also shutting down a bunch of older games, like 13 of them.
Woo, 13. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a big move.
Yeah.
Some fan favorites are getting the axe, including Madden, NFL 21, and The Simpsons. Tapped out.
That's interesting. While it's normal for companies to retire older games eventually, shutting down 13 at once, that could be risky.
Definitely. It could impact their revenue and maybe even upset some loyal players.
It's a tough call. They're trying to save money by not maintaining those older games,
Yeah.
but they also risk alienating their fans.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance.
So it seems like the next year is going to be pretty crucial for EA. They need those new releases to be hits, and they need to navigate this whole shutting down older games thing carefully. They've got a lot to prove.
They do. The next 12 months are going to be a real test for them. They need to show investors that they're still a leader in the gaming world, that they can innovate, and that they can deliver.
It's a high-stakes game, for sure. And it'll be fascinating to see what happens.
It really is. And, speaking of balancing acts, we should probably take a closer look at EA's financials. You mentioned that Q3 earnings miss earlier. What exactly happened there?
Sure, their net bookings for Q3 came in lower than expected, like significantly lower. They were projecting $2.32 billion, but only hit $2.22 billion. And then on top of that, they had to lower their projections for the rest of the year. That kind of spooked investors, made them think maybe things weren't as great as they'd seemed.
So it wasn't just Dragon Age that caused problems. Sounds like there were some other things going on. Did they say anything about what caused these lower numbers?
They did. One of the big things was that their extra content sales were down specifically for EA Sports, FC Ultimate Team, and Apex Legends. Seems like gamers might be watching their spending a bit more, being more picky about what they buy in-game. Which, maybe that's just a sign of how the economy is doing overall, or maybe it's just players changing their habits.
That's a good point. It shows how important it is to think about the bigger economic picture when you're looking at a company like EA. The gaming industry isn't immune to what's happening in the economy. So even if EA's core business is strong, things outside their control can still affect their performance.
Yeah, exactly. It's a reminder that there's always some risk involved in investing. But hey, let's not focus only on the negatives. We've talked about the challenges, but let's go back to EA's potential for growth. They're still a huge player in the gaming world with some really valuable franchises. What strengths do they have that could help them bounce back from these recent setbacks?
Well, for one thing, they've got a massive player base that's really loyal to their games. That's a huge advantage, especially these days when it's getting more and more expensive to attract new players. Their games are also known for being really well made, immersive gameplay, good stories. And we can't forget that they have a history of making hit games, especially in the sports and Star Wars genres. Those are big names that appeal to millions of players around the world.
Oh, those are definitely major pluses. And like we said before, that big stock buyback plan shows that they have confidence in their own future. It's like they're saying to investors, hey, we think our stock is worth more than it's trading for, and we're putting our money where our mouth is.
Yep. Share buybacks can be a good way to increase shareholder value. But it's important to remember they're not a magic solution. EA still needs to fix the things that led to their struggles in the first place. So what strategic moves would you like to see them focus on this coming year?
That's a great question. I think it all comes down to execution. They got to make sure those 2025 releases are amazing games that not only meet but exceed player expectations. They need to rediscover that innovative spirit that made them an industry leader. And maybe most importantly, they need to win back the trust of investors by showing them a clear vision for the future.
I agree. They need to show that they're not just coasting on past successes, but that they're adapting to the changing gaming world. That could mean exploring new types of games, embracing new technologies like the metaverse, or even trying out different business models like subscription services.
Those are all really interesting possibilities. The metaverse especially is getting a lot of attention, and it's easy to see how EA could use their strong brands and their experience in game development to create some really cool experiences in that space.
Totally. The metaverse is a huge potential market, and it would be smart for EA to get involved early on. But it's still a new and unproven idea, so they'll have to be careful and make sure they're creating experiences that players actually want.
It's pretty exciting to think about all the different ways they could grow. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second. What's your final take on EA stock? Should our listeners be thinking about adding it to their portfolios?
It's a tough one. Like we've been saying, there are both risks and rewards with investing in EA right now. They're at a crossroads, and what they do in the next 12 months will have a big impact on where they go from here. If you don't like taking risks, you might want to wait and see how those 2025 releases do and if they can address the issues that caused their recent problems. But if you're more comfortable with risk and you believe in EA's long-term potential, then maybe buying a small amount of stock could be a good idea.
That's a balanced view. I think it's really important to emphasize that people should do their own research before making any investment decisions. Don't just take our word for it. Look into EA's financials. Read what industry analysts are saying and form your own opinion. Investing is a personal thing, and what works for one person might not work for another.
Couldn't agree more. It's all about finding investments that fit with your own goals, your risk tolerance, and how long you plan to invest.
Exactly. Speaking of goals, I have a question that might help our listeners figure out what they think about EA. If you had to sum up EA's future in just one word, what would it be?
That's a good question. I think the word that best describes where EA is at right now is potential. They have everything they need to be successful, a talented team, strong brands, and a history of innovation. But whether they can turn that potential into real results, that's still to be seen. The next part of their story hasn't been written yet, and it's up to them to show that they can adapt change and succeed in this constantly evolving gaming landscape.
I like that. It's a word that captures both the uncertainty and the excitement around EA's future. It reminds us that while the past can give us some hints, the future is always unknown. And that's what makes investing so interesting. We're not just looking at numbers, we're trying to predict the future. And sometimes the best investments are the ones that require a little bit of faith and a willingness to embrace the unknown.
Well put. It's that uncertainty that keeps things exciting. And with a company like EA, there are definitely going to be some surprises along the way.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our EA discussion, let's give our listeners some key takeaways. We've covered a lot from their recent financial performance to their plans for the future. What are the most important things for investors to remember?
I think the main takeaway is that EA is at a turning point. They're facing some hurdles, but they've also got some major strengths and opportunities to grow. The choices they make over the next year or two are going to determine their direction for years to come.
Great point. It's not just about the next quarter. It's about their long-term vision and their ability to adapt to a changing market. So for investors who are looking at EA, it's super important to dig deeper than just the headlines, really understand their strategy, those new games coming out, and their overall financial health.
Exactly. Don't just go with your gut or follow the hype. Do your own homework. Check out the industry reports and form your own opinion. Investing is a long game, not a quick win. Being patient and doing your analysis is key for long-term success.
Solid advice. Speaking of analysis, let's give our listeners an update on EA's current market stats. As of today, February 9th, 2025, what's the stock price at?
Right now, EA is trading at $128.60. That's down from its 52-week high of $168.50, which reflects those concerns we've been talking about.
So there's been some ups and downs, but that also means there's potential for it to climb back up if EA can get back on track.
Yeah.
What about trading volume? Are people actively buying and selling EA stock?
Yeah, the recent trading volume has been pretty high, around 4,781,460 shares. That tells us that investors are definitely watching EA closely. They're eager to see how the next few months play out.
Sounds like everyone's on the edge of their seats waiting to see what EA does next. Will those 2025 releases be the hits they need, or will they disappoint? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an exciting ride.
It definitely will be. That's what makes investing in the gaming world so interesting. It's dynamic, fast-paced, always changing with new innovations and surprises. Never a dull moment.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I think you've covered just about everything on EA for now. We've looked at their strengths and weaknesses, analyzed their upcoming games, and discussed the bigger trends affecting the gaming industry. It's been a great discussion, and I hope our listeners got a lot out of it.
Me too. Remember, investing is all about learning and growing, and every company we talk about gives us a chance to learn more and improve our investment strategies.
Absolutely. And before we go, we want to hear from you, our listeners. Tell us your thoughts on EA in the comments below. What did you find most helpful? What questions do you still have? And what other companies would you like us to cover in future episodes?
We love getting your feedback. It helps us make sure our content is relevant, engaging, and valuable to you.
And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast and share it with your friends, family, or anyone who might be interested in learning more about investing.
We release new episodes every week covering a wide range of companies and investment topics. So be sure to tune in for more in-depth analysis, expert insights, and thought-provoking discussions.
That's all for today. Thanks for joining us on Investing Talk Podcast. We'll see you next time. Happy investing.